The floor wax gleamed like a shallow lake beneath the fluorescent lights, and Mark Davis's mop left bright trails that looked almost like hope. He counted strokes, not minutes, because nights were easier if they were measured in something he could finish. He had exactly 47 days on the calendar taped above his apartment stove until the deadline the pediatric surgeon had circled in dry erase marker. 47 pancakes he'd promised to flip for breakfast, 47 mops across the oncology wing, 47 chances to make enough money for Ethan's operation. He didn't see the woman until she said his name. Mark Davis? A voice soft but steady. He turned, and the past arrived in a press badge clipped to a dark blazer. Claire Hanlon, investigative reporter. You once worked at Redwood Steel. Before the fire? The mop handle trembled in his fingers. He had scrubbed his life clean of that place, or so he thought.
Mark's cart squeaked in the pre-dawn hush of Crestfield Hospital, a private orchestra that played only for the lonely. He wore gray coveralls that smelled of lemon cleaner and old worries, and a ball cap whose brim had learned his sweat and grief. On his second break, he stood by the pediatric ward window and pressed his palm to the cold glass, watching a nurse adjust a child's blanket with the same care he wished he could give the world. Through the reflection, his face looked older than 40, like someone had sketched fatigue in pencil and never bothered to erase. Back home, the calendar above the stove held taped paper stars. Ethan had colored each star a different shade of rocket red. Every night, after his shift and before the day job at the warehouse, Mark flipped a pancake shaped like a moon and told his son the same story. One day we'll go to the park and you'll run so fast I'll think you're a comet and I'll have to chase you. Ethan would giggle and tap the scar over his sternum with 2 careful fingers. Then we'd better hurry, he'd say. Comets don't wait. Tetralogy of Philo. The words had lodged in Mark's life like a stone in a shoe he could never take off. The patch surgery from infancy had kept Ethan stable, but the cardiologist had underlined the next step, a valve replacement before his 9th birthday. That date lived in red on the calendar, even brighter than the stars. Insurance covered some, charity covered a little, and Mark's overnight custodial pay covered the space in between, the space that looked like an entire ocean. He had once known different noises, the buzz of heavy presses, the clang of steel, the camaraderie of men who trusted him with their lives. As a line foreman at Redwood Steel, he'd counted bolts and safety checks, not pennies. The night of the explosion still woke him sometimes, the burst like thunder, the heat rolling over concrete, the alarms. 3 men hadn't come home, and then came the lie. The altered inspection sheet with his signature cut and pasted like a ransom note, a press conference where the plant director called it negligence. Mistakes were made, Richard Klein had said, eyes smooth as glass. Our foreman, Mark Davis, failed to follow protocol. Charges fizzled in a bureaucratic fog, but reputation carried its own verdict. Mark's notice of termination had been printed on high-quality paper, as if good cardstock could dignify a firing. Mr. Davis? The voice returned to the fluorescent-lit present. Claire Hanlon stood near the supply closet, careful not to block his cart. Her hair was pulled back like she'd prioritized truth over vanity, and her eyes were the same clear gray as the dawn he hadn't seen in weeks. Sorry, she added. I know this is awkward, but I think you were framed. I think you still are. He wanted to laugh, but laughter belonged to people who'd slept. Ma'am, he said, aiming for polite, landing on tired. I have 2 jobs and a kid whose heart gets loud when he climbs stairs. I don't have time to look backward. Sometimes the past is the key we need to unlock the future, she said, holding his gaze with a steadiness that felt like a dare. A whistleblower reached out after reading one of my pieces on industrial fraud. He had scans of maintenance logs from your line. The dates don't match the server stamps. Someone retrofitted the truth after the fact. He felt his breath hitch. Servers. Stamps. Words that belong to other people's battles. Even if that were true, it's been 8 years. Some stories age into proof. She offered a business card. I'm not here to cause trouble at your job. I'm here because injustice calcifies when we leave it alone. Call me, please. He tucked the card into his pocket where it warmed with the heat from his body. Through the night, routine steadied him. Sinks, then mirrors, then floors. He collected half-filled coffee cups that smelled faintly of burnt hope. At 4, he wiped a smudge from a pediatric window decal, a paper tree with paper leaves where families wrote blessings. Run, laugh, swim, grow, someone had scrawled in crayon. He traced the word run with his fingertip and felt something like ache and prayer combined. At 7, he traded his mop for a steel-toed boot in the morning shift at Keller Logistics. Boxes were easier than people. They yielded to order without complaint. By noon, he had recited numbers to himself, 47 days, 47 pancakes, until numbers blurred into a sleepy hum. When he finally collapsed on his apartment couch, Ethan was drawing planets. "This one's you," he said, holding up a purple sphere with a ring of stars. "I named it Dad Turn. It's sturdy and takes care of smaller moons." Mark smiled so hard his face hurt. He glanced at the calendar, at the red circle that had become their compass. On impulse, he pulled Claire's card from his pocket and set it under a fridge magnet shaped like a tiny tree. He didn't call, not yet, but he left the magnet on top, and that felt like a door cracking open. Claire didn't wait for his call. The next night she appeared by the vending machines with 2 coffees and a manila envelope. "I'm not stalking you, okay, I'm lightly haunting you, but I brought creamer." He shouldn't have accepted the cup. He did anyway. The envelope held photocopies, inspection checklists, shift rosters, a screenshot of an email header with a timestamp that contradicted a filing date. "If this is a forgery, it's very tidy." "That's the tell," she replied. "Real paperwork is messy. Fraud is pristine." Something loosened in his chest, not trust, but the memory of it. He heard boots clattering down those old catwalks, men cracking jokes about the coffee, Klein gliding through the plant in an executive sheen that never knew dust. Why me? Why care now? Because I can't stop thinking about a man mopping floors to pay for his kid's surgery while a millionaire sleeps like the truth is sedative. And because redemption isn't a luxury, it's oxygen. He pictured Ethan's careful fingers tapping his chest twice each morning, and his son's habit of whispering to the calendar like it could hear it. He pictured pancakes in a stack like a little tower of promises. "Okay," he said finally, the word tasting like risk. "Show me what you have." Claire grinned, not triumph, but relief. "I'll bring everything, and I'll bring decaf next time, or you'll start polishing clouds." "Deal," he said, surprised to find a smile he hadn't used in years. As she left, Claire tapped the paper tree on the pediatric ward window. "My mother used to say trees tell us the seasons, but hold their ground. Maybe this one's for you." He watched the corridor fill with morning and felt a trembling hope root itself like a sapling, thin and brave. The video interview filmed in a quiet corner of Claire's newsroom where plants leaned toward the big windows and the hum of printers set a rhythm that felt like work, not war. Mark sat with his hands folded, knuckles nicked from pallet straps, and looked into a camera lens like it was someone's wary eye. Claire kept her questions simple. Her power was never in the trap, but in the invitation to step onto solid ground. "What do you want from telling this now?" she asked. "I want my son to know his dad didn't quit," he said. "And I want the families to know they were lied to. I want the lock and the truth put back where it belongs." The piece aired on a Friday evening. By Saturday morning, strangers had posted comments under the paper's upload. "We see you. Stay strong. My dad was a millwright. Thank you for speaking." An old coworker, Marlon, texted after years of silence, "Always knew you weren't the type to skip a check.
Remember when you made us redo a gasket because the spec felt off? Beer's on me when this is done." Then the call came that knocked the wind from him. Not from Claire, not from a lawyer, but from the hospital's HR. "Mr. Davis, we saw the story. There's a fund we rarely publicize, employee hardship for pediatric care. It requires a formal request. I don't see one on file. Can you come by Monday?" He stood very still in his kitchen, one hand on the calendar as if steadying the world. "Yes," he said. After he hung up, he wrote "thank you" on Tuesday's square in black marker, then added a small drawing of a pancake with a smiley face because Ethan would notice. When he told Ethan about the possibility, the boy's eyes widened like they had their own sunrise. "Does that mean the doctor can put the new valve in sooner?" "Maybe," Mark said. "Maybe we get you fogging up the park with your running before school starts." They celebrated with pancakes, extra butter, and a drizzle from the emergency maple syrup reserve, a stash Mark had kept the way some people kept good whiskey. Ethan licked the plate and declared, with the authority of 8 years and 3 months, "This is how victory tastes." Then he insisted on penciling tiny rockets next to each day until surgery. "We'll count them down," he said. 10, 9, 8. But the world balances sweetness with tests. On Sunday night, a black SUV idled at the curb when Mark returned from swinging a late cleanup shift. The passenger door opened, and Richard Klein stepped out, thinner than Mark remembered, expensive as ever. He smiled the way people smile when they think they own your story. "Mr. Davis," he said smoothly, as if they were negotiating in a conference room and not by a cracked city sidewalk that smelled faintly of cut grass. Mark positioned his body between Klein and the doorway where Ethan's paper planes hung from tape like a fleet ready for launch. "You can leave," he said, "or you can talk on camera. Claire's 2 blocks away." Klein tisked, a sound too dainty for the damage he had done. "I admire your persistence," he said, "but I must caution you to tread carefully. Allegations have a way of ricocheting. I'd hate for your employer to question your integrity." "You already took 1 life from me," Mark said, voice even. "You don't get to take this one." Klein produced a large envelope like a magician revealing a rabbit. "You should see this," he said. "Consider it insurance." He set it on the hood of Mark's old truck and slid back into the SUV. The engine purred away like money disregarding the speed limit. Inside the envelope lay a photocopied memo with the Crestfield logo and a forged signature from a surgical nurse coordinator. It claimed the hospital had serious concerns about Mr. Davis's mental stability and honesty in relation to his child's care, recommending postponement pending review. It was cynical and chilling, and to anyone who didn't know him, plausible. Mark felt heat flare under his skin, not rage exactly, but the hum of protectiveness that lives in every good father's bones. He dialed Claire with the speed of a reflex. "They're moving. They're aiming at the surgery." She answered. "Don't panic," she answered. Already typing, he could hear the staccato of keys. "Send photos. I'll call Crestfield to verify letterhead codes and internal phrasing. If it's fake, we'll prove it. Meet me at the coffee shop on Harbor and 3rd and 20. The shop was all plants and brick and a chalkboard menu where the barista drew a tree beside seasonal lattes. Claire arrived with her laptop, hair in a knot that meant everything but appearances mattered, and spread her digital tools like a surgeon prepping a table. She zoomed in on the memo's micro-typography and grinned without humor. "Got you," she whispered. "The hospital uses a different spacing after colons, and the nurse's signature on file curls the S. This one hooks it. Plus, the internal routing code at the top is from radiology, not surgery." "So, it's fake," Mark said, relief rushing his words. "It's fake," Claire repeated, "and we're going to make sure the world knows it before anyone can blink." Monday came like a test and a gift. HR approved the hardship application in 30 minutes flat, the director's eyes damp as she pressed his hands in both of hers. "You should have told us sooner," she said. "Sometimes people forget we're a community, not just a payroll department." The fund guaranteed the remaining balance for Ethan's surgery, scheduled for 3 weeks out, a date Mark circled 3 times on the calendar,
then taped a tiny paper tree beside it because the symbol had begun to feel like theirs. Claire spent that afternoon calling Crestfield's comms office and the paper's legal team. The forged memo made her angrier than any corporate stonewalling. It reached into a child's hospital bed with dirty hands. "We'll do a follow-up piece," she said. "We'll show the forgery and the intention. They don't just want to protect their stock, they want to make you small." Mark went home to find Ethan at the kitchen table with a roll of tape, decorating the apartment with paper leaves they had cut out of green construction paper. "For the tree," he said, "so it has shade." Mark helped him tape leaves above the calendar, above the sink, above the door, a small forest conjured from scissors and hope. That night, when Ethan fell asleep with glue on his fingertips, Mark stood in the doorway and decided something he had been afraid to decide: to stop apologizing for surviving.
They met off-shift at Hazel's Diner, the kind of place where the waitress called everyone honey, and the coffee tasted like the American dream survived the night. Mark slid into a booth with a torn vinyl seam and watched Claire unpack her case like a magician producing scarves that had real people's fates stitched into them. She spread documents between two menus, laminated enough to survive a flood. "Here," she said, tapping a log. 3 days before the explosion, a subcontractor flagged a pressure irregularity on valve R17. The fix was postponed. See the note? Approval pending. Only the approval stamp is dated the morning after the explosion. That's impossible unless the stamp traveled back in time. Or forward, Mark said grimly. Someone stamped after, filed before. Claire nodded. And this? She held up a photograph of a safety cabinet. The lock had a hairline crack by the hasp. "Your old line engineer told me the lock was replaced right after the accident. The replacement serial number is in the receipt. The old lock disappeared." Mark's throat went dry. Only one person had the keys to both the cabinet and the lock inventory: the plant director. "Klein," he said, the name a splinter. Claire slid a flash drive across the table. Server images from the whistleblower. He copied them before he left Redwood 2 years ago. File names reference an internal initiative called Streamline. What it streamlined, apparently, was liability. He stared at his hands, at the grooves cleaner and palette work had carved there. He remembered the last conversation with Klein, the soft-spoken threat in a private office that smelled of leather and lawyer. "If you don't contest, we'll keep it quiet. Fight, and you'll never work in this town again." Mark had thought quiet would save the people he loved from shame. Instead, it had buried him. "Why tell this story now?" he asked. What if it makes Ethan's surgery harder?" Claire's voice gentled. "What if it makes it easier? People respond to truth like plants to light." And there's another angle. Redwood has a charitable foundation. It invests in, among other things, pediatric cardiac research. If they're laundering reputation with donations, the public should know. Hazel refilled their cups and slid a plate of pancakes toward them with a wink. "On the house for good looks and bad news," she said. Mark laughed despite himself, and cut the first pancake in half and saving the larger slice in an unconscious habit. He imagined wrapping it in foil, taking it home, reheating it for Ethan, who declared pancakes tasted even better the second time because they remembered. By the time the diner clock struck noon, they had worked through a plan. Claire would run a print piece first, carefully sourced, legally vetted by her paper's counsel. If Redwood hit back, they'd be ready with the server stamps and the missing lock trail. She asked Mark for a statement. He inhaled, measured the words the way he measured bleach, sparingly because too much could harm. "I never skipped a safety check. I never would. I can still name the birthdays of the men we lost. If there's a chance my silence helped keep the wrong story alive, then I owe them the truth." Claire didn't reach for his hand, she reached for her notebook. It felt like respect. "Tell me about the night," she said. "Tell me in details." He told her about the heat that rolled like a living thing, about the way steel sang right before it failed, about dragging a young apprentice named Luis out by the straps of his coveralls while alarms carved the air into jagged pieces. He told her he could still smell the tang of burnt plastic if he closed his eyes. He told her he went home and washed his hands for an hour and they still felt dirty because he couldn't scrub away guilt. When he finished, Hazel slid over a slice of pie without a bill, the way small towns apologize for the world. You'll need sugar for what's next, and coffee to go. Claire walked him to his truck. I'll keep you updated, and I'll keep your name out until legal clears it, unless you want to go on record. I want to, he said, surprised to hear himself add, I don't want my son to think we hide from hard things. That night, back at Crestfield, Mark's cartwheels felt less like squeaks and more like purpose. He paused by the community center board in the lobby, a clutter of flyers for blood drives, tutoring sessions, and a Saturday tree planting initiative by the Riverwalk. A volunteer had drawn a little sapling and written, "Tomorrow's shade is planted today." He traced the leaf with a ragged fingernail and thought about Ethan's red stars on the kitchen calendar, about how sometimes a promise looks like a tiny green thing pushing through dirt. 2 days later, Claire's article published. She texted a link and a careful warning. We're ready for pushback. The headline didn't use his name, but it used his life. Inside Redwood Steel, altered logs, missing locks, and a night 3 men didn't survive. Within hours, the paper's website groaned under traffic. Talk radio chewed the story like tough meat. The newsroom's legal inbox filled with letters that used words like defamatory and alleged. Claire sent him a picture of her coffee mug parked on a stack of affidavits. Still standing, she wrote. And then the whistleblower called her from a prepaid phone and said the part Mark had feared most. They know, they're moving. Claire didn't sleep that night. Mark didn't either, though he pushed his mop down silent halls anyway. He had folded a paper plane for Ethan and left it on the kitchen table with a note, "Test flight when I get home." He had begun to talk to his life as if it could hear him. At dawn, his phone buzzed. "We have a name. Klein approved the deferred maintenance. I have the email." Claire's text came with a screenshot, a header that showed a date at war with a document. Proof didn't feel like confetti. It felt like a key turning in a lock you'd forgotten you'd installed. He stared at the picture until the letters swam. The mop bucket reflected the ceiling like a private lake. He called Claire for the first time unscheduled. "If we do this," he said, "we do it fully. We say my name." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure he said mine when he blamed me." He can hear it now with the truth attached.
It broke on a Wednesday, because nothing dramatic respects the courtesy of Mondays or Fridays. A business blog with a shiny veneer and murky standards ran a headline that made Mark's stomach drop. Janitor hero tied to new forgery. Hospital letter questions his fitness as a parent. The forged memo, redacted just enough to look legit, sat in the body of the piece like a snake pretending to be rope. Within hours, local TV stations picked it up without context, and social media did what it does. Amplified, argued, forgot to breathe. Crestfield's admin called Mark to temporarily suspend him while they reviewed concerning allegations. The words were formal, the eyes apologetic. "I'm so sorry," the administrator said, voice low, as if that could soften the blow. "It's policy. This will be quick." Policy didn't pay rent. Policy didn't flip pancakes for an 8-year-old who counted down rockets on a calendar. Mark rode the elevator down with a paper box holding his few belongings, a photo of Ethan at 4 wearing a cape made from a dish towel, a second-hand thermos, and a maple syrup sticker Ethan had smacked onto the lid, and felt the old despair paw at his ankles. The lobby's community board gleamed to the left, as if inviting him to remember. Tomorrow's shade is planted today. He texted Claire one sentence. "They suspended me." She replied with 2. "Meet me at the newsroom in 30. Bring the box. We'll carry it back together." The newsroom buzzed like a beehive with a deadline. Claire commandeered a conference room named for a retired editor, slid the forged memo onto a projector screen, and invited the paper's tech reporter, legal counsel, and a calm digital forensics analyst who wore a sweater with a tree embroidered near the collar. "We're going to treat this like open-heart surgery," Claire said, glancing at Mark for permission. He nodded, his gratitude hot enough to turn his ears red. The analyst lifted her chin toward the screen. "First, file origin metadata. Whoever scanned this used a consumer-grade app that leaves a predictable artifact. Second, internal code. Hospitals use consistent internal codes routed through department prefixes. This one's wrong. Third, typography. The letterhead kerning on Crestfield is off by 1/10 of a point. Their corporate font is licensed and not easily imitated. Claire's editor entered midstream, eyebrows raised, and left 5 minutes later with the kind of smile that meant a front page was about to happen. "We go live at 5, he said from the hallway. "I want this airtight." At 4:45, Claire touched Mark's forearm. "You don't have to speak on camera for this one. We can carry it." "I do, because this stain isn't just ink. It's what my son will see when he Googles my name one day." The TV studio was a borrowed corner of the paper's video team space. All soft lights and the mechanical kindness of people who know a story is also a person. Claire sat across from him. The set designer had placed a small potted sapling between their chairs, a quiet inside joke that made my chest loosen. Claire led him through the facts, through the forged memo, through the answer Crestfield had provided minutes before airtime. "We have no such internal document. We are cooperating with authorities to identify whoever fabricated this." She turned to camera for her closing. When power can't disprove the truth, it often tries to discredit the truth-teller. Tonight, we have evidence of a forgery. Tomorrow, a child still needs surgery. Let's let our priorities reflect our humanity. The segment aired at 5. By 5:17, Crestfield had reinstated Mark with an apology that sounded like it had been written in a sprint. By 5:54, donations to a verified fund set up by the paper's philanthropy desk poured in with notes like, "For Ethan's rockets," and "For the dads who keep mopping." By 6:02, a prosecutor's office spokesperson announced an investigation into corporate interference with a private citizen's health care. By 6:30, Richard Klein's name trended for the first time in his life without the cushion of a press team. The victory felt less like fireworks and more like a deep breath. Mark returned to Crestfield for the night shift he'd never actually left, shook hands with the security guard who'd been forced to deny him entry earlier, and parked his cart by the pediatric wing. When he replaced a trash liner, a nurse touched his shoulder. "My brother died in a mine. I've waited a long time to see somebody push back." He nodded, feelings stacked too tight for words. On his break, he wandered down to the community center annex where the hospital hosted after-hours tutoring. Kids bent over math worksheets while volunteers coached. On a side table sat a plastic container labeled Pancake Friday, with a slot for donations to fund free breakfast for pediatric families. Mark pulled a 10 from his wallet and dropped it in, the bill fluttering like a small green leaf. The next morning, the district attorney held a press conference. Claire stood up front with other reporters, hair brushed and voice steady. The DA read counts that felt like closure sewn into legal fabric: obstruction, evidence tampering, conspiracy. A judge signed a warrant. The camera captured Klein in a suit that cost more than Mark had paid in rent for 6 months, hands behind his back, eyes still convinced the world owed him gravity. Mark didn't watch the clip more than once. He chose instead to take Ethan to the Riverwalk tree planting event on Saturday. The volunteers handed them 2 saplings and bright orange gloves. The wind smelled like wet dirt and fresh starts. Ethan giggled at the worms and insisted the tree be named after the moon. "Because even when you can't see the moon, it's there," he explained solemnly. Mark tamped earth around roots and silently revised the metaphor to include people and truth. That afternoon, they walked to Hazel's where the waitress had taped Claire's article to the pie case. "For the hometown wall of fame," she said, sliding over 2 plates. Ethan explained tetralogy of Fallot to her with the bravado of a kid who'd outgrown being afraid of big words. "They fix a valve, then my heart stops getting out of breath." The day before surgery, Claire knocked on their apartment door with a small brown bag. Inside lay a tiny calendar charm on a string and a folded card. "For counting down the right things," she'd written. Mark tied the charm to the cabinet knob and realized his life had quietly refilled with people. He lay awake that night, not from dread but from anticipation. He pictured the pediatric OR as a room where hands knew how to build a different future. He pictured pancakes cooling on a plate with a note that said, "Afterward," in Ethan's block letters. He pictured the tree by the Riverwalk growing rings on rings, silent and certain. Hospitals at dawn feel like cathedrals of quiet competence. The pre-op nurse fastened a soft cap over Ethan's hair while he explained his rocket taxonomy for the 100th time. "There are the fast ones and the faster ones," he said, eyes sparkling. "Today I am the fastest one." Mark kissed his son's forehead and breathed in the scent of shampoo and bubblegum toothpaste, ordinary fragrances more sacred than incense. Claire stood in the doorway with 2 coffees and a set of crossword puzzles she'd printed because waiting needed structure. "I brought a 5-letter word for luck," she said. "Truth." Mark laughed, and the laugh went all the way to his shoulders. When the anesthesiologist arrived, the doctor crouched to Ethan's level and described the mask as if it were an astronaut's gear. "We count backward together," he said. Ethan gripped Mark's fingers and mouthed 10, 9, 8, until the numbers melted into sleep. The doors swung closed. Time changed texture. Mark and Claire found chairs in the waiting area under a mural of a tree whose branches held paper leaves. Families had written messages that made strangers cry. Claire suggested they write one when this was over. He nodded, half listening to the low orchestra of beeps and footsteps and the soft rumble of a coffee cart rolling by. They talked the way people talk when words have to steady a long stretch of time. She told him about her mother's habit of keeping a calendar on the fridge and granting Days small medals, a sticker for bravery, a drawn heart for kindness. He told her about his father, who used to take him fishing at a pond that smelled like algae in summer. He laughed, describing the way his dad always burned pancakes and pretended he'd meant to. He admitted that he was terrified that Ethan would someday read the worst versions of his story before the best. Claire promised that if that day came, she'd sit beside him and hand him the best. Hours folded. Every 30 minutes, a nurse phoned the waiting room with a sentence that buoyed him like a life ring. "He's doing well. He's stable. They're placing the valve now." Mark measured his breathing with these updates, counted tiles, counted letters on the crossword, counted the loops in the carpet pattern. He excused himself once to wash his hands for no reason, just to feel like he could scrub something clean and make it better. At last, the surgeon walked in, eyes smiling above the mask lines that still creased his cheeks. "It went perfectly," he said, untwisting his cap with the satisfied absent-mindedness of someone who has just done a tremendous, ordinary miracle. "The new valve is functioning. He'll be in ICU for monitoring and then to the floor. Barring surprises, he'll be chasing you within weeks." Mark's knees went soft in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. He pressed his palms to his eyes and let relief wash through him like spring rain after a winter that went on too long. Claire squeezed his shoulder, a simple human tether. "You stayed," he said, voice rough. "Where else would I be?" she answered. They scrubbed in for a short visit. Ethan lay small but fierce under a constellation of monitors, his skin flushed with good circulation, lips pinker than Mark had seen them in months. Mark whispered a thank you he didn't bother aiming anywhere in particular. Gratitude didn't need directions. He put the little calendar charm on the bedside rail. "We're going to start counting up now," he told the sleeping boy. "Days since you ran." The next week unfurled like a time-lapse of a flower opening, measurable and miraculous. Ethan woke grouchy and hilarious, declared hospital jello a science experiment, and tolerated physical therapy with theatrical sighs and sudden bursts of pride. His first steps around the ward were a shuffle disguised as a parade, but to Mark, they looked like a comet finally allowed to streak. Clayne's arraignment happened during a nap. Mark muted the TV and read Ethan a book about a tree that grew taller than anyone expected. The prosecutor called Mark privately to say the case would proceed with the vigor the public demanded and the caution justice required. Mark responded with exactly the amount of energy he had for the past now that the future was moving. "Thank you." When discharge day arrived, the nurses lined the hall and rang a little bell someone had donated to mark good thresholds. Ethan wore a t-shirt that said, "New parts, same heart," and carried a paper bag with his get well cards. They stepped into sunlight that tasted like oranges and asphalt, and Mark pretended to squint just to hide a tear he didn't mind anyone seeing. They stopped first at Hazel's because rituals matter and because pancakes make sensible bookends to surgery. Hazel cried openly when she saw the boy's color. She flipped a perfect golden stack and drew a heart with berries. Ethan took a bite and announced, mouthful and fearless, "This is how victory tastes, again." A week later, the Riverwalk saplings had small leaves. Ethan asked if trees felt wind the way people feel hugs. Mark said he thought so. Claire filmed Ethan racing a shadow, edited the clip with soft captions, and posted it with "Redemption runs fast." The video found strangers who needed it. Donations the family no longer needed went to a fund in the names of the 3 men who died at Redwood, earmarked for worker safety advocacy and scholarships for apprentices like Luis, who attended the dedication with his own toddler on his shoulders and eyes that said he remembered everything. Summer bowed toward fall. The community center's bulletin board grew a fresh flyer. Saturday pancake mornings, pay what you can. Mark volunteered, flipping batter into circles that looked like small moons and listening to parents trade exhaustion and grace. He taught a teenager how to tell when the bubbles meant it was time to flip. "Patience," he said, smiling, and a steady whist. At a cool September evening, Claire and Mark walked the Riverwalk as Ethan darted ahead, a ribbon of laughter threading between them. The trees wore new leaves, proud as medals. "I keep thinking about the night I said your name in that hallway," Claire admitted. "I worried I was trespassing." "You knocked," he said. "I answered." They paused on a small footbridge, city lights winking like a constellation that had made itself at home on Earth. Mark reached for her hand, not because stories demand a romance, but because the seasons of his life had made room for gentleness. Their palms fit, ordinary and honest. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "Then we'll draw it on the calendar as we go, and we'll give the good days stickers." He laughed and kissed her cheek, a gesture that felt like a promise and not a performance. Ethan called from the end of the bridge, pointing at the sapling they'd planted months before. "Look, it's taller than me now!" Mark looked at his son, then at the tree, then at the woman whose insistence had returned him to himself. He thought about pancakes and paper leaves, about servers and signatures, and the fragile integrity of facts. He thought about how truth had been a tree ring, not obvious in the moment, revealed only when you look back and count. "Let's go home," he said. "Tomorrow's pancakes won't flip themselves." They walked together toward the glow of their apartment windows. The calendar charm clicked softly against the door when they opened it. Mark wrote a small note on the square for that day, "First bridge run," and drew a tiny tree in the corner. Ethan added a rocket, and after consideration, a heart. They stood back to admire their art, a shared theology of ordinary triumphs. Outside the city breathed. Inside the truth never needed to knock again. It lived there now, by the stove, on paper, in the rhythm of a heart that had finally found an easy, durable beat.